So, up, we'll start this one too, uh, and do a little clap. Can you hold it for me?
Sure.
And so, okay. So you can keep it if you want.
Okay.
You can keep it if you want. This is just you know, we don't know.
Yeah. Well,
So
probably.
yeah.
That's part of it.
Great. So thank you, Ronnie, to come to this very experimental first interview.
My
Uh,
pleasure. Oh, I'm the first guinea pig.
yeah,
Got it.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. That's you.
Okay.
So we now we have another picture of you. That's very nice. So we have also
Good.
all the setup. Okay, so the way I wanted to do this is to ask you about something in your life, and in your life there is a lot of research, and just I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about one specific moment where you had, I don't know, it could be, we thought about shifts in thinking, but also just an experience, or just I don't know, something that is relevant to you, both for your life and your
Mhm.
research.
Okay. So, um, you emailed me this, and I had to think about it. So I'm going to I changed my mind on what I want to talk about. And a few years ago, um, I started thinking about how do we, yeah, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, so I'm always interested in how we take what we learn in the lab and then apply it um, in organizations, in life in general. Um, and it occurred to me that a lot of what we do in terms of studying creativity and innovation and has uh, can benefit researchers, right? Because if you think about what research is, we need to come up with creative ideas all the time. So how do we take what we've learned from creativity research and apply it to science and the scientific process? And if you look at the scientific process models, there's a lot of similarity to models of creative thinking, right? You need to come up with a hypothesis. That's very much problem identification, problem construction. After you generate the hypothesis, you test it. Well, that's idea generation. You then evaluate your results. Okay, and then the cycle starts again. Uh, so I started thinking about that, and it really impacted a lot of my thinking across the board, making sure that I personally use what we know about the creative thinking model and apply it to my own thinking. A lot of my early work focused on problem construction, still does, but almost exclusively my early work, my dissertation was on problem construction and so on. So I'm very sensitive to how I think about problems and trying to think about problems from different perspectives and try not to too quickly come up with one way to conceptualize the problem. So, for example, when I started looking into teams and team creativity, um, wanted to find where the gaps in the research was. And interestingly enough, as I looked at the research, you have team creativity work that looks at the team as sort of the environment in which the creative individual is, or a team as the unit of analysis, right? So we're interested in creative teams. And a lot of the work there focuses on the social aspect, these different social processes like, psychological safety and trust and conflict and communication, all very important things, but we don't have as I started to read, I realized that we don't really have models of team cognition, which is not surprising because teams don't technically have cognition. Cognition is at the individual level, but we don't talk about what does the team do with that team cognition, with that individual cognition. So, thinking about problem construction, um, if I understand the problem one way, do you understand the problem the same way? Do you understand it differently? What happens if we understand it different? Actually, so this goes back many years because I started problem construction research at part of my dissertation. And I remember having a conversation with my advisor, Mike Mumford, about this process. And at the time, we really had, there was no model. We didn't know exactly how it was working. And um, I was trying to explain to him my thinking. Um, I don't remember what he thought at the time, but my thinking was that um, we don't look at the entire universe and then pick and choose. We have to make some basic selections, and I made the analogy at the time you had to go to the library, unlike today where you can find everything on the web. And I'm like, when I look for books on a topic, I don't go searching the entire library. I go to the BF section, which is the psychology section, right, in the duodecimal system. So I go to the BF section where all the psychology books are, and that's where I'm looking. I'm looking at in specific places. I narrow things down,
Mm.
and from there, that really helped us develop the model of problem construction that we then published in 1994. But, it was through this conversation of the two of us thinking in different ways and finally sort of coming together. So I think with problem construction, and again, talking about sort of my approach to it and the theory, but also what I do in real life, is finding the balance between um, divergence and convergence, like we do in creativity, right? So you want to think about the problem in broad ways, in different ways, in multiple ways, and then synthesize that and come to some sort of a more, you can't do everything. It can't be so big that you can't study it.
Yeah.
And, you have to have more concrete questions. So then narrowing it down and finding those important questions that you want to ask and identifying what those important questions are. And I think where we sometimes have difficulty is knowing what's important and what isn't, right? Yeah. Because we have all these questions we want to ask, and okay, how do we pick and choose?
Mm.
And it's like, okay, I'm going to focus on this now and I'm going to do the other ones later. Of course, when I focus on this now and I finish the study and then I have 5 other questions, and then you have to pick and choose again. Um, so kind of balancing that convergence and divergence and then convergence is really critical, both in terms of the process itself, but also in the science of how we study the problem. So the whole topic of problem construction was not something I thought about. I was in my first year at the master's level, not even PhD. So I really did not have any idea. When I went to talk to my advisor, he's like, let's look at this. And I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm new. I started to read. There was not a whole lot to read at that point. I remember there was a book, the Chicago Art Student Study, that was in a book by Csikszentmihalyi and Getzels. And then there were 4 papers. That was it. That was my literature on the topic. And so there were a lot of open questions, and a lot, and I had to figure out, where do I go from here? So one thing that I did was, what areas have similar kinds of research questions? So I went into cognition and looked at the problem solving and decision making space. So things like problem framing that Newell and Simon talked about. So it's not exactly creativity, but it's relevant. So what can I pull from there that would be relevant? The designs are different. The problems they're trying to look at are different. They're much more close-ended problems, so it doesn't quite apply. But, trying to diverge again, finding those, oh, it's similar, I could borrow something from it. but what exactly can I borrow and what I can't, and finding those disparate pieces of information, but then trying to put them together. And because there was barely anything, I felt like I could, whatever question I asked would be relevant because we didn't have the answer. So it's a great place to be if you don't mind the ambiguity, right?
Yeah.
So, luckily I actually kind of enjoy living in that place where I feel like I have a big canvas that I could, or big playground I could play on. And we still have a lot of questions that are not answered.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, okay, this concept is similar, it's not the same. um, what have they found? So, for example, when we look at problem solving, a lot of the literature focuses on problems that have one right solution. So, obviously, that part doesn't apply to creativity.
Mm.
But some of the findings, that was around the time that Geek and Holyoke were talking about analogical transfer and problem solving through analogy and so on. So there were pieces like from Geek and Holyoke, I borrowed the concept of problem representation. So when we solve a problem, we then have a schema in memory, and they already detailed what it was. Now they focused on uh, more defined, well-defined problems. I was interested in ill-defined problems, but the concept of problem representation could still apply.
Okay.
And we've used that. So again, trying to figure out, and that's the hard part when you don't have a lot of research, going to other fields and seeing what can you look at, and then sifting through it and going, okay, can this apply? What exactly applies and what doesn't apply,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that makes sense? Yeah. So we didn't actually change the concept of the problem representation itself. What we did suggest is, so when they talked about problem representation, they talked about taking a problem representation and then using it as it is for a new problem. And we said that doesn't work for creativity, because if you have a problem representation of how you solved a problem before and you take it and apply it to a new problem, that's not creative.
Mm.
So, how do people solve problems creatively if they have these problem representations? So, what we needed to do was think about a way that people, we still have this basis of problem representation, which is a basic cognitive concept, but now how do we use it, for creative problem solving? And the way we thought about this was, when you encounter a novel problem, uh, because it's something new and you haven't solved for this problem before, you're not going to have one problem representation generally come up. You can, because different pieces will elicit different problem representations. Oh, it reminds me of this problem, but also this problem
Mm.
and this third problem. And then how do you sift through them? And if what you do is you take different pieces from different representations to think about a problem,
Mm-hmm.
you might come up with a creative way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
If you go, oh, it's really similar to problem A, and I'm going to ignore B and C, even though they're pieces that are similar, then it's not going to be a creative solution. So we have some thoughts. That's an area that hasn't been fully tested yet.
Mm.
So, one, so there are different ways that I think people can use this. It could be by strength of association. So what is primed? More similarity to the problem. Um, but we really don't know how people pick and choose
Mm-hmm.
between those different elements and put them together in a new way, because that's part of the process that we haven't researched. So these are still unanswered questions. One of the things that I suspect is happening is attentional mechanisms, right? So do people pay attention to certain parts of the problem, as well as the strength of how it relates to previous experiences that they've had. So obviously, I can't manipulate the previous experiences that they've had, but I can manipulate the strength of the cues and the problem. For example, if I give them a vignette, I can make certain pieces bold, right, or in bold type, or repeat something a couple of times in the problem. We haven't done this yet, but I think, so this was a question, sort of like, how would I test this? So, without a whole lot of putting some thought into it, I think those are some things we could do. But I'm sure if I had some more time to think about it, I
Yeah,
could
sure.
come up with additional ways to manipulate that and kind of test some of these theories. Um, but in teams, I think it's really interesting because different people have different conceptualization, and we could see through the team discussion, and this is something I've started to do in the last 4 or 5 years, is actually videotape and video and record teams as they talk, and go look at the process of how different people suggest different conceptualizations. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes somebody says, oh, we should think about the problem this way, and the rest of the team goes, sure, that's what we should do. But you can see different ways in which the team start to either come together around one representation or take different pieces. So in that respect, I think studying teams gives us a little bit of a different methodology. It's not quite the same as within individual, obviously, but like when we want to analyze a process, one of the things we could do is have people do a think out loud, right? Which has all kinds of problems. But in a team, if they don't talk, if they don't express it, it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So, it naturally happens.
Yeah.
Whereas the think out loud is not natural, right? But the team conversation is natural. Is it perfect? No. Some people are not going to talk. Some people are not going to offer their thoughts. But it gives us a different lens to look at things. So, for example, just this last year, we finished developing and testing a coding system for team interactions that focuses on the creative problem solving process. So, what does problem construction look like in teams? What are some ways of expressing it in a team conversation? What does idea generation look like, which we know a little bit more about? What does idea evaluation look like? Um, and from there, we could start to map on the process and look at it in a much more dynamic way, which is, again, something that to me is very interesting, and sort of a shift, if we're talking about shifts, a shift in my own thinking, because I tend to think about things dynamically, but when you're measuring with surveys and so on, tends to be very static. Um, in this way, when a team interacts for 20, 30 minutes, you could see, even in this short period of time, the kind of that dynamic movement. Different countries have different conceptualizations of labs. So for us in the US, it's me as the faculty member, my graduate students and undergraduate students that are interested in research.
Yeah.
We all work together as a team. So, we in lab meetings, we'll have conversations about, what's the best way to test for it? What can we do? How can we manipulate it? Let's think about the pros and cons of things. What can we measure that would help us understand this better? And we go from there.
Yeah.
And then,
So you try to apply your own construction on your team.
Absolutely, I tried to do that. And also what I've learned about team research about how team, what are the social functions? So, having psychological safety, making sure that everybody's heard, making sure that students feel comfortable expressing themselves, making sure that they feel comfortable telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about, right? And they have a different opinion, and it's okay. And I can learn from that. And I do, but they need to know that, and they need to feel comfortable to do that.
Yeah.
And when they start, and I tell them, the minute you start telling me that you have a different opinion and you're willing to argue about it, that's a sign of growth for you as a student, and that I'm doing a good job.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the perfect ending, I think.